Okay. Let me see how much time is left in this video. Man, we're 30 minutes into this one now. All right. Okay. All right. Next are the muscles of the thoracic wall. First is the external intercostal. It originates at the lower margin of ribs. Of rib, it says. Insertion, it inserts at the upper margin of next lower rib, and it courses obliquely forward and downward. Innervation is caused by the 1st to 11th intercostal nerves, and the actions are that it raises the ribs, inspiration, and supports intercostal spaces, as well as stabilizes the chest walls. And then we have internal intercostal, which originates at the lower margin of rib, as well, inserts at the upper margin of next lower rib, and courses obliquely forward and upward from costal angle to sternum. Innervation is caused by the 1st to 11th intercostal nerves, and the action is that it lowers ribs, expiration, and supports intercostal spaces, and stabilizes the chest walls. Then we have the innermost intercostal, which originates at the lower margin of rib, inserts at the upper margin of the next lower rib, courses obliquely forward and upward from the costal angle to sternum. Innervation is caused by the 1st to 11th intercostal nerves, and the actions are it lowers the ribs, expiration, and supports intercostal spaces, as well as stabilizing the chest wall. Subcostal is our next muscle, and it originates at the lower margin of the ribs, inserts at the inner surface of ribs 2 to 3 ribs below. Innervation is caused by the variable lower intercostal nerves, and the actions is that it depresses the ribs, expiration. And we have the transverse thoracis, which originates at the sternum and the xiphoid process, the inner surface, inserts at the 2nd to 6th ribs, costal cartilage, inner surface, innervates comes from the 2nd to 7th intercostal nerves, and the action is that it lowers ribs, expiration. Then we have the diaphragm. Everyone knows the diaphragm. So the costal part originates at the 7th to 12th ribs, the inner surface, lower margin of costal arch. The lumbar part, the origin is the medial part. Jesus Christ. So the lumbar part, the origin comes from the medial part of L1 to L3 vertebral bodies, intervertebral discs, and anterior longitudinal ligament as right and left crura. The lateral parts come from the lateral and medial arcuate ligaments. Sometimes there's some words that just break the brain. And the sternal part originates at the xiphoid process, the posterior surface. All of them insert at the central tendon. They all get innervated by the phrenic nerve coming from C3 to C5, the cervical plexus. And the actions they cause are principal muscle of respiration and aids in compressing abdominal viscera. And the synergists of the ribs and thorax. For elevation/expansion, which is involved with inhalation, we have the anterior scalene bilaterally, the middle scalene bilaterally, posterior scalene bilaterally, sternocleidomastoid, external costals, serratus posterior superior, pec major, pec minor with scapular fixed, serratus anterior with scapular fixed, and the subclavius. Then for depression/collapse, which is involved with exhalation, we have the internal intercostals and serratus posterior inferior. Then for muscles of inhalation, we have the diaphragm, the anterior scalene bilaterally, the middle scalene bilaterally, the posterior scalene bilaterally, the sternocleidomastoid, the external intercostals, the serratus posterior superior, the quadratus lumborum, pec major, pec minor with scapular fixed, serratus anterior with scapular fixed, and the subclavius. And final muscles of exhalation. We have internal intercostals, serratus posterior inferior, external oblique, internal oblique, transverse abdominis, and quadratus lumborum.